China has been in the news this week. It's not pandas or pagodas this time, it's spies. Have you heard about this?
I saw a little bit. I was away when all this went down. So wasn't it like there's a spy in Westminster?
Yes, according to MI5. So if we go to this article, Britain's intelligence agency MI5 has warned MPs that an alleged spy has infiltrated Parliament to engage in political interference activities on behalf of China. Christine Lee was accused of attempting to influence UK politicians while facilitating donations from figures in Hong Kong and the Chinese mainland, according to a security briefing circulated to MPs and peers on Thursday. It emerged that former Labour Minister Barry Gardiner received more than £500,000 from Miss Lee's firm to cover staffing costs, while much smaller sums were given to Labour HQ and Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey.
Right.
£500,000.
First thing on my mind, though, is that in this country, I don't know about other countries, you can look up MP expenses and every MP and see how much of their money you're wasting. And one of the major expenses is staffing costs to run their offices. And that's publicly available and you can learn about it. Well, what's going on with this? Is that going to be on the expenses list? I presume not.
Well, it's not public expenses, is it?
But also, who's he spending it on? Because he's already presumably getting like 200 grand from the taxpayer to pay for his staff. So this is not, well, I just need a researcher, presumably. It's something worse.
Well, that's a very good question, to be honest. I'm focusing more on the Chinese espionage that we will see here, because there's quite a lot of it, and I actually struggled to cram it all into this segment. But if we want to do a deep dive on his expenses later, I'm sure that would be very useful.
I'm just saying about the level of corruption. It won't just be because, I just need some money. He would have known what it's going on.
Yeah, he's got money already. So here we go. The alleged agent, a London-based solicitor, was given an award by Theresa May when she was Prime Minister in 2019, and former Prime Minister David Cameron was photographed speaking at a 2016 event for a Chinese engagement group that Miss Lee founded. And there are some photos in this article of that. Asked on Sky News whether he had conversations about government policy with regards to China, Mr. Gardiner said, "No, not in great detail." The MP denied he acted as a cheerleader for the Hinkley Point C nuclear power station project funded by a Chinese state-backed firm. Interesting.
Who believes him?
Miss Lee's firm, Christine Lee & Co., helped fund staffing costs over a 5-year period until June 2020, but Mr. Gardiner insisted that he had not personally benefited from those donations in any way.
This is why I was saying about the staffing costs, because the idea that they spent $500,000 on that and not just pocketing the money somehow, I'm very suspicious of. I mean, the fact that he may have, I don't know, a new, what's the one from Yes Minister? Rose water vase that he gets in his house.
Right, yeah.
That's worth 200 quid, he swears. That's what's on my mind about the amount of money there.
She also gave £5,000 at least directly to the Labour Party and £5,000 to Lib Dem leader Ed Davey. So, as far as we know, the evidence for Chinese Communist Party collusion comes from MI5 and is not yet public. What we do know is that Christine Lee engaged in political influence campaigns to lobby the UK government on behalf of Chinese communities, including organising mass letter-writing campaigns to MPs. Now, that's perfectly legitimate behaviour for a British citizen involved in politics. However, issues doing this on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, I would say this is an obvious subversion of the democratic process.
It's also not unique to, let's say, Chinese communities.
No.
I mean, the overlap between Islamist groups and the Pakistani, let's say, lobby in the UK, politicised groups, is very strong as well.
Well, you don't even have to limit yourself to the UK. In Europe, there's large amounts of Turkish diaspora who get actively involved in Turkish politics while also being involved in the politics of the country they live in. And it does seem that the presence of large minority groups with large political interests outside of the country is a potential weak point for subversion of the democratic process in these countries. But let's move on to corrupt politicians and businessmen, because all of the usual suspects are in the trough again. David Cameron. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. I wonder what's under the table there. Couldn't be a pig's head, could it? So he attempted to set up a £1 billion UK-China investment fund, which he would have been the vice chair of. David Cameron discussed the establishment of a $1 billion UK-China investment fund in a meeting with the then-Chancellor Philip Hammond just 15 months after leaving office as Prime Minister, despite the convention aimed at preventing former ministers from lobbying for 2 years. So this was a controversy that he had got involved in politics and lobbying and that too early. The thing is, it is just a convention. As far as I'm aware, it's not actually a law. So
I don't know if you know, in my politics textbook, there is a whole section on corruption and lobbying, and it was written before this scandal came out, and there's quotes from David Cameron saying that it's a huge problem, it needs to be clamped down on.
Really?
Yeah, I'll have to dig it out.
yeah, that's brilliant. He finally gave up on this because this lasted for years. In 2021, there's a quick article here from the Financial Times, a lovely photo of him in front of 2 Chinese flags. It's a good photo, actually. But what other prime ministers of this country do you think might be getting their hands dirty? Can we think of anyone?
Blair?
Yes!
Oh, how'd I get it?
So we go to the next one. How Tony Blair built a business empire in China. Tony Blair has privately begun acting as a broker between Abu Dhabi and China, a Telegraph investigation reveals. This was back in 2015. A series of documents show how the former Prime Minister has been courting some of the most influential Chinese political and business leaders, and then introducing them to the Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth fund he works for. He has also facilitated talks between the chief executive of Dow Chemical and a series of Chinese government and business figures. The role assumed by Mr. Blair shows his prominence in one of the most important areas of global economic cooperation this century, between the extremely wealthy and strategically important Middle Eastern Emirate and the emerging superpower of China. I hate the way they always describe China as an emerging superpower.
Why?
As if it's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
There's a lot of internal problems with China, which reporters like this don't seem to get very interested in.
I also love how he's sort of rimming Blair there. He's like, this shows that Mr. Blair and his prominence in the global... No, it shows that he's corrupt. Like, that's the line. It's not... You know, this isn't making him look good.
Right. Exactly. The disclosures came after the Telegraph on Thursday revealed the scale of Mr. Blair's international business and advisory activities for the first time, providing details from documents that suggest the taxpayer is contributing up to £16,000 a week to support him.
Oh, wonderful.
If he's getting £16,000 a week for support, then he shouldn't be involved in any of these ventures. And if he is involved in these ventures, he doesn't need taxpayers' money. I thought the only reason that he would get taxpayers' money would be so that he doesn't have to prostitute his political experience like this. Anyway, he has visited China more than 20 times since stepping down as Prime Minister, compared with just 5 trips as leader. A spokesman for Mr. Blair said he received no payment for the introductions involving his Abu Dhabi client.
No, this is like a Hillary Clinton Foundation, isn't it?
Yeah. So you could say that Tony Blair is pandering to China. But if we go to the next one, this is from 2007. Straight after he had finished as Prime Minister, he was over to China and he raked in $500,000 for one speech where he said nothing.
What?
Yep. And the Chinese press reported on it because this was 2007 and they could actually talk. So here we go. Tony Blair has been panned by the Chinese media after he was allegedly paid $500,000 for a speech that revealed nothing new. The British former Prime Minister made a 3-hour trip to a luxury housing estate in China's southern province of Guangdong, during which he delivered a speech that left newspaper commentators far from impressed. The China Youth Daily, which is affiliated to the Communist Party's Youth League, said Mr. Blair was forthcoming with pleasantries and cliches without offering any insight. Yeah, we got used to that. Like reports made by some local officials, there was nothing new in his views. So was the speech worth the large sums of money paid out by local officials and businesses? It questioned. We should exercise less ostentatiousness and vanity and learn more new and genuine knowledge, especially when we are using even a penny of taxpayers' money, it said. Quite based from the China Youth Daily. A 2005 survey found the average salary of a production worker in China was £1,200. They give $500,000 to Blair. Yeah, okay, fair enough. The sponsor of Mr. Blair's China trip, the Guangda Real Estate Group, offered him a house worth 38 million yuan, £2.4 million, according to the Guangzhou Daily. Why? Goodwill? Interesting.
Has nothing to do with his last name being Blair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The newspaper did not say whether he accepted the property, but described Mr. Blair's visit to Dongguan as another of his money-raking trips that had also taken him to Beijing and Hong Kong. In a mark of how rapidly China has descended into authoritarianism under President Xi Jinping, it's hard to imagine the China Youth Daily being nearly as forthcoming in its criticisms of government spending in 2022 as it was in 2007.
Could you imagine if he turned down the house? Because they said he didn't turn, although they won't say whether he turned down the house. He'll take the $500,000, but he'll turn down the house. I'm not corrupt. I'll only take $500,000. Not the £2.4 million house as well. That would be too far. Who buys that?
I wonder what $500,000 is per word of his speech. That must be well above the going rate.
A couple of bucks per word, surely.
More than that, surely. I mean...
Depends how long he blathered, I suppose.
Blair is a man of many words, so that's true. He's not the only one. Let's have a quick look inside of the business world, and this is from last year. Sir Mike Rake steps down from Huawei UK board. Former BT chairman Sir Mike Rake, strange name, has announced he will be stepping down from the board of Huawei in the UK. In the latest blow to the Chinese company's presidents in the UK, Sir Mike Rake said that he will leave his role as a non-executive director next month. He had joined the board in 2019 and helped advise Huawei through an extremely tumultuous period that has seen it struggle worldwide. Why might Huawei have struggled, do you think, in 2019? Was there any controversy to do with Huawei in that year? Someone being arrested in Canada, perhaps? So I'm just going to take a break here to say that one reason it's difficult to separate espionage and influence from above-board business dealings is that most above-board business dealings are crooked anyway. But apart from that, it's that we live in a globalized world economy, and there seems to be revolving doors between all of these top companies and top governments. We in the West are used to these companies being essentially unaligned with national interests, or to some extent, and they exist in their own multinational world. So when a multinational company arrives in the UK, it's not like an enemy military base is being set up. We tolerate Amazon being set up in Swindon, but perhaps not a base. It depends. But this is not the case in China. Successful Chinese companies are often heavily infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Party to ensure political obedience, which reminds me of the mid-century Germans. And larger businesses like Huawei are in many places almost synonymous with Chinese intelligence. Like they are described as literal arms of the Chinese Communist Party, even though they run technology. In fact, because they run technology, it makes them very useful for espionage, you would imagine. I mean, if Apple were a subdivision of the CIA, that would be quite something, I would think. Now, it's worth mentioning as well that this behaviour, which in the West would be described as nepotism and corruption and things that Tony Blair does, is more of the norm in Chinese business. So guangxi, or networking, is extremely important, and business takes place through these personal channels rather than necessarily according to rules or laws. Of course, guangxi gets rather more complicated when it comes to foreign spies, so let's have a quick look at the USA. And this is a 2019 article on China's intelligence gathering activities. China's spies are on the offensive. And it just goes through a list of US operatives who are basically selling out for Chinese money. We have this Kevin Mallory chap who's working for the military and the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency, behind on his mortgage, $230,000 in debt. And so he basically ended up getting recruited via LinkedIn, flying over to China and selling his state secrets for cash. Debt is a horrible thing, by the way. But, yeah.
Now, halfway through about to finish the active measures book, and every single spy they recruit is always just someone in debt.
Well, how is it that all these spies are ending up in debt?
Well, they start off in debt, and then here's a bunch of money, give us your secrets. Very cool.
No, but how do they end up in debt to then get...
they're not spies to begin with, usually.
Oh, okay, right. But lots of these people are here, and debt is a pretty horrible thing, and you can see how it makes these people vulnerable to selling out and betraying all of their morals, such as they may have. But it's also worth pointing out that with the sort of fractured state of the West and the betrayal of many of the peoples of these countries by their governments, it's hard when you ask the question, okay, who is he actually selling out? In these particular cases, it's quite clear, but in some cases, you could imagine someone is selling out the establishment rather than necessarily selling out the American people. And I think that's just a mark of how disunited the West has become and how fractured. So I'm not going to go deeply into this. You can check it out in the references if you want to. There's lots of information there. I want to talk about universities for a bit. The universities are also recognized as a vector of attack for Chinese espionage. And the raw number of PRC exchange students are very high. Were there lots of Chinese students in your university?
Yeah.
Yeah. Universities have long been criticized for over-reliance on fees from Chinese students, especially considering the rampant intellectual property theft in which China has long been implicated. If we go down here, this is Imperial College, and here in 2015 we have 15.7% of the student body is from China. That's nearly a sixth. 1 in 6 students straight in from China at one of the UK's top Russell Group universities. But if we go to 2020, we see how the picture's changed on the next tab. That's not the one. Go back to the graph. So there's a tab on the graphic showing 2020 under nationality of full-time student admissions. Oh, well, anyway, I've got the numbers here. In 2020, it goes up to 23.4% of students coming from China. So that's a quarter. A quarter of students at Imperial are coming from China. And that's not mentioning any of the ones who have other nationalities, who might be other or British nationality, but also Chinese or related to that. That's a lot. And then we go to the US statistics, we see that this is also huge. If you can read that one there, it goes up to 372,500 people in the year ending 2020. Now, of course, most Chinese exchange students are not spies. The vast majority have nothing to do with this. And like I must emphasize with this segment, don't blame ordinary, didn't do nothing wrong Chinese people for the handful of lunatic Chinese Communist Party spies. But you have to recognize when you have a base rate of nearly 400,000 foreign nationals from an ambiguously hostile country in your universities, you are going to have spies.
If you had 300,000 Soviet students coming over,
yeah,
what would you expect?
Right. How many of them would be spies? Most of these spies are concerned, curiously enough, with spying on other Chinese exchange students and diaspora rather than foreigners necessarily. Take the example of this student, whose case we're going to go into, who was given asylum in Australia after the Chinese government attempted to pressure him into spying on Chinese nationals abroad. If we scroll down to point 25 here, it's quite long. This is the whole court application. So this is his story here. After I graduated from high school in China, I was recommended by the school to the police academy. I then studied at Political Education Department about 1.5 years from September 2008 to December 2009. In December 2009, I went to Country 1 as a private overseas student studying at School 3. Sorry, it's legal, so a lot's been redacted to preserve his identity. But everything in relation to my study in Country 1, including my passport, was actually prepared and organised by the National Security Bureau. In other words, I was in fact sent by the NSB to Country 1. Before I left China, I was interviewed by Mr. A, who was a senior officer of the NSB. He told me that many young people around my age had studied in the overseas countries, such as in Country 1, during recent years, and that the NSB expected me to keep eyes on those young people and report their activities, as many as possible. I was particularly asked to pay attention to those who had actively been involved in anti-communist organizations or evil cults, such as Falun Gong. Frankly speaking, I just wanted to have a chance to study in overseas from the beginning, and I never intended to do anything for the NSB. On the other hand, I detest in my heart very much that the communist government always infringe upon basic human rights of Chinese citizens, as I firmly believe that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion, and that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Therefore, I always found some excuses not to contact the people from the NSB after I arrived in Country 1, and I did not send reports back to the NSB. The NSB became more and more unhappy with me. Their people not only approached me more and more frequently, but also harassed my parents in China. They threatened that if I failed to work for them honestly, I would be punished severely, and also my parents would be forced to pay double the cost of my study at the police academy, as well as my expenses to study overseas. As a result, I suffered from more and more pressure. So you can see, again, the levers of pressure here are financial. It's that, okay, if you don't do what we say, if you don't work as a spy, then we're going to essentially gouge your parents for more money than they can possibly pay off and destroy your entire family.
But this is also the kind of incredibly creepy Orwellian behaviour that we should make as a as a rule, if you are going to send students to our country, you are not going to send students doing this sort of thing
Yeah, absolutely.
to their fellow students.
Yeah.
To be spying on them.
Right, because it makes it worse for literally everyone at our universities if there are Chinese spies around spying on all the other Chinese spies, who then have to be really careful about everything they do and everyone they talk to because they are being watched. Yeah, that's not the sort of free and open atmosphere of intellectual inquiry we aspire to in Western universities.
I should correct, you said spies spying on spies. No, is it spies spying on the citizens?
Yes, that's true.
Students.
But, I mean, if there are enough spies, it does become spies spying on spies, spying on spies, spying on spies. So
yeah, that probably also is taking place.
Yes, but thanks for the correction. In June 2011, I finally arrived in Australia, he says. In July 2011, Mr. A took some police to go to my home in my hometown in Fujian. They firstly searched my home with an excuse of seeking anti-communist and anti-government materials, and then took my father to the NSB in City 2 for interrogation. During the interrogation, Mr. A formally informed my father that I had been regarded as a traitor of the NSB and that I had leaked top-secret information to Falun Gong practitioner Miss D, and that I had seriously violated against the national security law and that I must be punished severely. In the end, Mr. A told my father that due to my anti-communist and anti-government activities, my family now owed 500,000 yuan to the Chinese government up to now, and that my father had to make the payment within 3 months. So again, like the story we covered last week, it's just pure arbitrary extortion.
How much is that? Just wondering.
It is definitely impossible for my father to repay the debt to the government. A few days after then, my parents and sibling had to leave home. Since then, they have gone into hiding in order to escape from persecution by the authorities.
80 grand, apparently. He's got to pay back in 3 months.
Yeah.
Because his son refused to be a spy.
Right. Yeah. So I thought I would just wrap up this segment with some conclusions. We have just touched the surface of China's influence and espionage activities abroad. You could do an entire podcast on it, and indeed some people do. ATV podcasts are quite good on this, I do believe. I should have put a link in the references. So there's a lot that's going on. This is an evergreen topic that we're going to have to keep an eye on if we want to avoid our countries being subverted by Chinese communist spies. The Chinese people, however, are the biggest victims of Xi Jinping's increasingly totalitarian and authoritarian surveillance state, so that has to be remembered. Chinese communist espionage is full spectrum, particularly affecting universities. The economic prosperity brought about by exporting the entire world's manufacturing sectors to the PRC is now being used to buy off disillusioned Western spies and also pay the way of Chinese spies into British universities. Fabulous. Every nation does engage in espionage, but can we really justify this degree of openness to a state that coerces its citizens into spying by threatening their families? I would say no.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go over to lotuseaters.com to subscribe to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this video, which is Contemplations, that went up over the weekend about why the mainstream media are terrible and are bad for you. But if you'd like to keep up with what else is coming out on the website, you can always follow us on Getter. So you could go, for example, to see more from Josh at Josh's Getter account here at Josh_firm. Thank you and goodbye.